Okay. Whenever you're ready.
During the 60s and 70s, Arthur Haley was king of the airport novel, not least because he once wrote a novel called Airport. He wrote pulpy melodramas that were easy to read and had no literary pretensions. They were the perfect books to read while you were wedged between two seats on an airplane, just trying to land in Tucson or Calgary or wherever it happened to be. His fourth book, called Hotel, was a mammoth bestseller and was turned into a movie and a TV series. The story was set in a New Orleans hotel called the St. Gregory. However, the book's description of the St. Gregory didn't fit any contemporary hotel in the Big Easy. Instead, it was based on the hotel where Haley lived for a year and a half while doing research for the book. In case you couldn't guess, the hotel in Hotel was based on the Royal York right here in Toronto. This is Muddy York. So, Greg, how are you doing on this not quite winter, not quite spring day?
You know what? I'm doing okay because the weather actually has been pretty nice, and it's really good to get out into the city when the sun is shining and you're just getting that first glimpse of the warmth. I really like it.
Well, here's hoping it stays.
Yeah, right. I bet you won't get probably a sprinkling of snow. We always do, kind of like mid-March sometimes, but who knows? Global warming.
I'm fine with a little sprinkling. I just don't want one of those little practical jokes that nature likes to pull where they drop 20 centimeters on us around Easter weekend.
Hopefully, here's hoping.
Now, on today's topic, which is one of the most recognizable symbols of Toronto. It's an image everyone will recognize, in no small part because we've all walked past it 100 times.
Have you ever stayed at the Royal York?
I have not. I don't think I've ever gone above the lobby.
Oh, really? It's quite the hotel. I definitely stayed there. Feels a little dated now, but it still just has that old world charm, and I can just imagine all of the things that happened at that hotel.
Well, I think that datedness is part of the appeal. It's like going to Wimbledon, old-fashionedness and, a little primness is part of the appeal.
100%.
Well, the Royal York is really the grand old dame of Toronto hotels. People can debate whether it's the poshest or the nicest, but it's certainly the most venerable. When it first opened in 1929, Maclean's magazine described it as a city within a city block and said that it has served to confirm a people in their confidence in the future of their country.
How come journalists don't talk like that anymore? I really miss it. I don't think I've ever heard a modern journalist talk about how the new hotel in town confirmed their confidence in Canada's future.
I know people today are just so cynical. Now, the Royal York sits on Front Street, right across from Union Station. But it wasn't the first hotel at this location. As soon as the first trains began to arrive and depart nearby, people recognized that this was a promising place for a hotel. In the 1850s, Sword's Hotel opened, named for its owner, Patrick Sword. Wasn't a medieval theme or anything. At the time, prominent businessmen would stay here to get away from the hustle and bustle of downtown, which at the time was located a few blocks to the east. How times have changed. It was briefly renamed the Revere House before reopening in 1862 as Queen's Hotel. During the American Civil War, Queen's Hotel served as the unofficial headquarters for the Confederate Secret Service in Canada. And we know that they worked on a plan there to burn down New York City in revenge for the burning of Atlanta.
Notwithstanding this cloak and dagger, by the end of the 19th century, Queen's Hotel had become one of the most fashionable hotels in town, and one of its regular guests was a politician from Kingston named John A. Macdonald, who usually stayed there when he was in town. It was the first hotel in Canada to have elevators, running water, central heating, and a phone in the lobby for guests to use. Oh, the luxury! When the Great Fire of 1904 swept through downtown, the Queen's was spared, partly due to the soaking wet bed sheets that were hung out the windows by guests to stop the fire. However, in 1927, the Canadian Pacific Railway decided to tear it all down. The Canadian Pacific Railway, aka the CPR, had been building luxury hotels since the 1870s to attract tourists to Canada, which they could explore by buying train tickets. Some of the most famous hotels in Canada were built by the railway companies, like the Chateau Laurier and the Chateau Frontenac. During the 1920s, the CP bosses wanted to build a new hotel in Toronto that wouldn't just be the fanciest in Canada, but the grandest in the entire British Empire. The Queen's Hotel owner had died in 1925, and CP was able to buy it for just over $1 million. They promptly set about demolishing it.
Sorry, just as a former resident of Ottawa, I feel compelled to point out that it is not the Chateau Laurier, it's the Shadow. Any Ottawan who happens to be listening to this felt that in their bones as soon as they heard it.
Okay, the Chateau.
The Shadow.
The Shadow.
As in, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Chateau Laurier does.
The Chateau Laurier. During demolition, workers came across the intact skeleton of a blue whale. Very interesting. Just a reminder that this happened in the middle of downtown Toronto, which is very crazy. Can you imagine that happened today? Somebody demolished a building and uncovered a blue whale. Wow.
I mean, I once found the skeleton of a shark once, but I don't think I've ever found a whale.
Really? Okay, well, that's a story we're going to have to hear at some point. Eventually, they figured out that back in the 1880s, the area had been part of Harry Piper's Wild Animal Zoo, and the star attraction had been a whale held in an outdoor pen. After the whale died, he was buried and forgotten about until workers began to dig the foundation for the Royal York.
The new hotel cost $16 million in 1920s dollars. It was designed by two architectural firms, Ross and McDonald and Sproat and Rolfe. Now, those names didn't mean anything to me, but Ross and McDonald designed Union Station and Maple Leaf Gardens, while Sproat and Rolfe designed the Canada Life building. So these were big names in Canadian architecture. The formal name for the Royal York style is Chateauesque, inspired by the castles of the Loire Valley. Most of the Grand Railway hotels were built in this style. The Royal York was specifically designed to dazzle. It is 28 stories tall, which made it the tallest building in the British Empire when it first opened in 1929. However, 2 years later, it lost this title, the Bank of Commerce building on King Street. It was also the biggest hotel in the British Empire, with 1,048 rooms, and every room had its own phone and bathroom. As you said, this was high luxury in those days. The main 11 floors of guest rooms have an H-shaped floor plan to ensure that every room gets natural light. There was also a 12-bed hospital, a library with 12,000 books, and the highest dance floor and dining room in the British Empire. That last one seems like an odd thing to brag about, but they were proud of it all the same.
The Royal York's opening was a major event attended by the Premier and the Mayor. The first signature in the guest book belonged to Governor General Viscount Willingdon. It was also front page news in the Montreal Gazette because anything that happens in Toronto is bound to dazzle bumpkins in Montreal. Yeah, we said it. A grand ball was hosted that night. However, this led to a minor scandal because the ceiling of one of the ballrooms featured 3 topless women. The attendees were so shocked at this display that the artist was recalled and asked to paint a cover on one of the breasts of each of the panels. Boo.
Well, there's a reason it was called Toronto the Good.
When it opened, a room at the Royal York cost $2 a person, and guests enjoyed grilled Lake Ontario trout for 85 cents or a filet mignon for $1.75. That's a pretty good deal today, but it was expensive for 1929, and that quickly became a problem because 5 months later, Wall Street crashed and the Great Depression began. The Royal York couldn't focus on being a haunt for the rich and famous. It needed all the customers it could get. It said that staff lived off tips and managers tried to attract guests right off of Front Street.
In 1934, the Royal York made news after beer magnate John Labatt, yes, that Labatt's, was abducted. The kidnappers demanded a ransom of $150,000, worth about $3 million today, and told his brother Hugh to check in at the Royal York to await instructions. One imagines that the kidnappers wanted Hugh to keep a low profile, but he immediately told the press, who set up camp in the hotel lobby. Eventually, the kidnappers panicked and released Labatt, who made his way to the Royal York where, quote, hysterical bedlam ensued when the media recognized him. Canadian Pacific wanted the Royal York to be a social venue, as well as a hotel. From 1930 to 1935, a radio station called CPRY, for Canadian Pacific Royal York, was broadcast from the hotel. Programming included a series called Concert Orchestra, featuring a 55-piece orchestra. These concerts came from the Seafloor Concert Hall, which was the original home of the Canadian Opera Company and used to have the largest pipe organ in Canada.
But not the largest in all of the British Empire. That seems to be a theme here. For people of our parents' generation, the most famous part of the Royal York was the Imperial Room, which was a nightclub from the 40s all the way into the 90s. Now, bear in mind this was an old-fashioned suits and martinis kind of nightclub, the kind of place Sinatra used to play. Louis Ginetta became famous as the maitre d' who enforced the dress code and decided whether or not to let you in. He described the Imperial Room as one of the greatest dining rooms in all of North America. The chandeliers, the Chateaubriand steak, the 12-piece big band for dinner and dancing. Later on, it hosted the first appearance of a local comedian named Jim Carrey, who said, "I'll never forget that night as long as I live. Everyone played that room real big star. And here I was, bopping about the stage like a clown, hoping they wouldn't start throwing the silverware at me. I felt I could face any crowd, any audience after that night at the Imperial Room." There was also the Black Knight Room next door, which was more like a jazz club. Louis Ginetta famously stopped Bob Dylan from going to see Tina Turner perform because he wasn't wearing a tie, not even a bolo tie. The list of famous people who stayed at the Royal York is too long to list here. However, the most important guest would have to be Queen Elizabeth II. I had to use her full name there because her mother, Queen Elizabeth, also stayed there. When the Queen was there, she would naturally use the royal suite, which included 2 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a fireplace, a private elevator. She also has a special bed that was reserved for her use. Perhaps, as a thank you, the royal family donated a clock that stands in the middle of the circular staircase in the lobby.
In 1948, the Royal York became the inspiration for a famous Grey Cup tradition. This was the first year that the Calgary Stampeders had qualified for the game, and Calgary fans wanted to startle the stuffed shirt Torontonians with their Western cowboy ways. So they decided to ride their horses through the lobby of the Royal York. The Stampeders won the game, and this became a tradition. Every time Calgary plays in the Grey Cup, Stampeders fans will ride a horse through the lobby of the fanciest hotel in town. You may remember back in 2012 when Royal York management didn't want to admit Marty the horse. A crowd stood outside the hotel chanting, "Let us in!" And eventually not only did they admit Marty, but they allowed him to sign the guest book with his hoofprint. 21 years later, the Royal York would cross paths with the Grey Cup in a different way. The trophy had been stolen, and thieves made a ransom demand. The CFL refused to pay and was planning to build a replica. However, the Toronto police received an anonymous tip that the trophy could be found in a locker at the Royal York, and the locker key could be found in a phone booth at Dundas and Parliament. When the police opened the locker, there was the Grey Cup.
Okay, I'm going to have to look into that story a little bit more. That sounds really cool. Not all of the famous events at the Royal York have been so lighthearted. In 1949, a fire on the SS Noronic docked in the Toronto harbor killed 118 people. The Royal York lobby became an emergency field hospital with guests and staff trying to care for survivors from the blaze. There have also been 2 murders at the hotel. One victim was a staff member who accompanied the police when they went to arrest a wanted criminal. The other was attending a mining convention at the hotel when he was shot by another conventioner after a heated argument. In 1955, the Royal York became embroiled in the mayoral election when it was revealed that incumbent mayor Alan Lamport had spent taxpayers' money on a private suite for meetings and cocktail parties. In 1958, the Royal York lost its title as the highest, biggest hotel in the British Empire to the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal. In response, a new East Wing was completed the following year to add another 400 rooms and reclaim the title. Despite its size, a former employee wrote that, "While working there, I was never intimidated at the hotel's size because, at its heart, Royal York is run like a small town where everyone knew everybody else, and it was this village-like atmosphere that Arthur Haley captured so brilliantly when he used the Royal York as the inspiration for his best-selling book, Hotel.
During the 80s, the roof garden ballroom that used to be the highest in the British Empire had to be closed due to fire code requirements and has been converted into office space. I mention that because it seems like a cool place to have an office. I work in the highest dance floor and dining room in the British Empire. Where do you work?
I guess bragging about it isn't so strange.
Nobody likes a smartass. In 2001, Canadian Pacific Hotels was reorganized as Fairmont Hotels and Resorts. As a result, the Royal York became the Fairmont Royal York. Not that anybody actually calls it that. It is currently managed by Fairmont, but owned by Kinsit Capital, Aurora Investments, Invest Hotels, and Ivanhoe Cambridge. I made up one of those names, and I'm betting you can't figure out which one it is.
No, you know what? I can't, because I was thinking Aurora Investment, but that exists for cannabis, so I don't really know.
Oh, shit. Is that real?
Yeah.
Oh, I made that one up. More recently, the Royal York decided to add a bee apiary to the roof of the hotel. It currently has 7 hives with about 1 million bees that produce about 400 pounds of honey each year, which they use in the hotel restaurants. Rooftop apiaries are now standard for all Fairmont hotels. Today, if Toronto is hosting a major event like TIP, the G20, or the Pan Am Games, some of the events will probably be happening there, and some of the visitors will probably be staying there.
In wrapping up our journey through the storied halls of the Royal York, we've traversed the corridors of history, culture, and hospitality that have defined Toronto, and by extension, a little bit of Canada itself. The Royal York isn't just a landmark, it's a living, breathing chronicle of the nation's evolution from a dominion under the British Empire to a vibrant, independent country proud of its heritage and optimistic about its future. From Arthur Haley's inspired depiction in Hotel to the modern eco-friendly initiatives like those rooftop bee apiaries we just talked about, the Royal York symbolizes adaptability and enduring charm. Its walls have borne witness to grand events, scandals, and the comings and goings of guests ranging from royalty to downright rebels. As we conclude this episode, let's remember the Royal York not just as a grand dame of hospitality, but as a testament to the spirit of Toronto, a spirit of resilience, innovation, and unwavering hospitality that welcomes the future, even as it honors its past.
You're here. If you'd like to follow us online, you can find our Twitter feed at Toronto_history. You can find our Facebook page at Muddy York History, all one word, or you can email us at muddy_york@outlook.com. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, guys.